The auction yard buzzed with noise, a mixture of bartered shouts, laughter that cut sharp like knives, and the restless stomping of boots against the dust. Heat hung heavy in the late afternoon air, baking the wooden beams of the corral and drying the earth beneath her feet. She stood in the middle of it all, hands clasped in front of her as though that small gesture could shield her from the sting of eyes that roamed and judged. They didn't see her as a woman with dreams, fears, or dignity. To them, she was something to be measured, evaluated, and dismissed. Her heart thudded in her chest with each word thrown like stones. "Too big for a wife," one man snorted, his voice carrying through the crowd. Another, smirking cruelly, muttered, "Ain't no man gonna want her." Laughter rippled, sharp and ugly. She felt the heat rise in her cheeks, shame pressing against her ribs like a vice, yet she did not lower her chin. Though her shoulders slumped with weariness, her eyes, those dark, storm-tossed eyes, still flickered with defiance. They might reduce her to a price, to a cruel joke, but inside, she refused to be less than human. The bidding began, if one could call it that. The numbers thrown were insultingly low, offered more for the amusement of the men than any serious intent. Each call of a number felt like another chain wrapping around her spirit. She tried to breathe, to steady herself, but the humiliation pressed heavy. She wanted to vanish, to dissolve into the dust beneath her bare feet. But she stood still, her body trembling as her worth was mocked aloud. Then, as the noise swelled, a shift came. A silence, not sudden, but creeping, like the way wind quiets before a storm. The crowd's jeers faltered, their grins fading as all eyes turned to the figure walking steadily toward the platform. He wasn't like the others, not in the swagger of his step nor the weight of his gaze. Dust clung to his boots, his hat shadowed part of his face, but there was no mistaking the strength in the set of his shoulders or the calm certainty in his stride. The cowboy stopped in front of her, his height casting a long shadow across the boards where she stood. His eyes, a clear shade of gray that seemed to drink in everything, settled on her, not with judgment, not with mockery, but with a steady, unshakable focus. For a heartbeat, she forgot the crowd, forgot the heat, forgot the shame. In his gaze, she felt something she hadn't in so long, recognition. The auctioneer cleared his throat nervously, unsure whether to continue. "Well, sir, you care to place a bid?" The cowboy didn't answer right away. Instead, he lifted his hand slowly, deliberately, as though the motion itself was enough to claim her. His voice, when it came, was deep and unwavering, cutting through the murmur of the crowd like a blade through silence. "She's not too big, she's just right." His eyes softened, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth as he added, "Just right for my arms." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, some coughing, others sneering to cover their unease. The laughter had died. She, too, stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat. Did she hear him right? Just right. Not too much, not too little, just right. Something inside her cracked, a dam breaking against years of ridicule and rejection. Tears stung her eyes, though she blinked them back fiercely, unwilling to let them fall before the men who had ridiculed her. But her heart trembled, fragile and raw, as if the cowboy's words had struck a chord buried deep beneath layers of pain. Without waiting for approval or confirmation, the cowboy reached for her hand. His palm was rough with the calluses of labor, but the grip was steady, warm, and real. "Come on," he said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She hesitated, her body frozen in place, half afraid it was some kind of cruel trick. But then the pressure of his hand tightened slightly, reassuring her, anchoring her. The world around them, the jeers, the dust, the cruelty, blurred until it was only the two of them standing there. For the first time, she felt not like a woman on display, but like someone who had been chosen. As he led her down from the platform, murmurs rose behind them, but he paid them no mind. His broad shoulders blocked out their stares, his steady stride carrying them forward as though they had someplace important to be. The warmth of his hand wrapped around hers felt stronger than any chain that had ever held her down. She glanced up at him, her voice catching in her throat. Why would you?" "Because," he interrupted softly, turning just enough to meet her gaze, "you belong with someone who sees you." "And I do." Her chest tightened, emotions warring inside her. She had no words, not yet, but for the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope spark to life. Not because he had pulled her from that platform, not because he had spoken against the crowd, but because in the way he looked at her, she wasn't too big, too much, or too anything. She was simply herself, and to him, that was enough. The dust swirled at their feet as they walked away from the auction yard, the noise of the crowd fading behind them. With every step, the chains of shame loosened just a little more. She didn't know where the road ahead would lead, but for the first time, she dared to believe it might lead somewhere she could finally belong. The air beyond the auction yard was different, quieter, though the sting of the jeers still clung to her ears. She walked beside him, unsure of where her steps were leading, her mind torn between disbelief and a fragile flicker of hope. The dust swirled beneath their boots as the fading sun painted the horizon in hues of gold and crimson. Every breath felt heavier than the last, not from the walk but from the weight of everything that had just happened. She had been moments away from breaking apart under the cruelty of men who saw her as nothing more than too much of what they didn't want. Yet here she was, her hand wrapped in the rough, warm grip of the cowboy who had silenced them all with words that still rang in her heart. He slowed as they reached the edge of the yard, pausing near the wooden fence that stretched into the open fields. She stopped too, unsure of what to do, unsure of who she was in this new, bewildering moment. He turned toward her, and for the first time, she dared to lift her gaze fully to his face. He was rugged, yes, sun-worn and marked by years of labor beneath the unforgiving sky. Yet there was something in the set of his jaw, in the steadiness of his gray eyes, that softened him. Not a softness born of weakness, but of strength that chose gentleness. She tried to speak, to find words to demand why he had done it, why he had chosen her when others had mocked. But her voice caught in her throat, trapped beneath the weight of disbelief. He seemed to notice her struggle, his eyes studying her with a patience that unnerved her. Without a word, he stepped closer, and before she could retreat, his arms slipped beneath her. In one smooth, sure motion, he lifted her from the ground as though she were the lightest burden he had ever carried. Her breath escaped her in a gasp. She stiffened, her hands instinctively clutching his shoulders as her heart hammered in her chest. "Put me down," she whispered, her voice trembling. Shame surged through her veins, fear that any moment he would realize the truth, that she was heavy, too heavy, that his arms would falter, that his strength would break beneath the weight of her body. But he only held her tighter, his chest solid beneath her cheek, his arms steady and unwavering. "Look at me," he said, his voice low but firm, carrying no command but instead an invitation. She shook her head, pressing her face against his shirt, terrified of what she might see if she obeyed. Yet he waited, his patience a strange kind of strength. Slowly, reluctantly, she lifted her chin. His eyes found hers instantly, steady and unflinching. There was no mockery there, no pity. Only a warmth that burned away the shadows she had carried for so long. "You think I can't hold you," he murmured, as though he could read her thoughts. His lips curved into a faint smile. "But I can, and I want to." Her throat tightened, tears threatening to spill. She had heard countless words thrown at her, each one sharper than the last, but never words like these. Not words that wrapped around her heart with such simple truth. She wanted to argue, to deny, to shield herself from the hope rising inside her. But his arms didn't waver, his gaze didn't falter. He shifted slightly, carrying her a few steps further toward the fence. The world seemed to fall away until there was only the steady rhythm of his breathing and the strength of his embrace. He lowered himself to sit on the rail, keeping her cradled close as though she were something precious. She had never felt so vulnerable, so seen, and yet, for the first time, she didn't want to hide. Her hands, still trembling, loosened their grip on his shirt. Slowly, almost fearfully, she let her fingers rest against his chest, feeling the steady thump of his heartbeat beneath her palm. It was strong, unwavering, a rhythm that seemed to speak without words. "You're safe, you're wanted, you belong." "Why?" she finally managed to ask, her voice breaking on the single word. His hand brushed a strand of hair from her face, the touch gentle, reverent even. "Because I don't see what they see," he replied softly. "I don't see someone too big, or too much. I see a woman meant to be held, meant to be cherished. And I intend to do just that." Her tears came then, hot and unstoppable, slipping down her cheeks as she buried her face against his shoulder. She wept not from sorrow but from the release of years of silent wounds, of a heart that had been told again and again it was unworthy. His arms tightened around her, not in restraint but in reassurance, holding her through the storm of her tears. When she finally lifted her head again, the sky above them had deepened into twilight, stars beginning to pierce the veil of night. He was still watching her, the same steady warmth in his eyes, as though he had all the time in the world. And for once, she let herself believe he might. "You'll tire of me," she whispered, still caught between fear and hope. He shook his head, his thumb brushing her cheek to catch the last of her tears. "Not a chance. You're just right. You always will be." Her heart ached at the words, but this time it was a sweet ache, the kind that came when something broken began to mend. She curled closer against him, letting herself rest fully in his hold. For the first time in years, she felt her body relax, not braced for ridicule, not weighed down by shame. Instead, she felt light, carried not just in his arms but in the truth of his words. The night deepened around them, and the world grew still. In the quiet, in the steady embrace of the man who had seen her differently, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was not too much. She was enough. She was wanted. She was right where she belonged.